Welcome to another show, the Beyond the Research to Reps Roundtable. This is exciting. I am your co-host, Dr. Coach Pat Ivey. A little bit about myself. I think it's important to always kind of come back to this. A former athlete, former college athlete and pro athlete. I was a college strength and conditioning coach for over 20 years in the Big 12, the SEC, coached at many schools, many professional athletes. Uh, I'm currently the senior associate AD for health and performance at the University of Louisville. I oversee several departments: sports science, sports medicine, sports performance, sports nutrition, mental health, mental performance. I'm the designated healthcare administrator, so the team physicians report up through my role, and I serve on a few boards. And that's just a little bit about me. So, Ted, I think it's important that you maybe remind the people a little bit about what you do and things you've done. And we don't have the whole entire podcast, Ted, so because your list is so long.
I'm a former college athlete, was a graduate assistant strength coach while I was working on my graduate degrees. I served as a strength coach in the SEC for a few years, and was a college lecturer for 16 years, and currently do a lot of sports science work with the NFL, NBA, and MLB. Ernie.
You know what? I, I'm not even going to do it. I'm the director of sports science at University of Louisville, and that's all I'm going to say because you know what? Like, I know what you're doing, Dr. Ivy. Like, you're just trying to grandstand here because we have Dr. Curt Tomasevicz on the call today, and like, I think Dr. Ivy is just trying to like say, hey, I'm like a really successful athlete and professional, but Kurt, Olympic gold medalist. Actually, I think you were at two Olympics, gold and silver medal, I
Uh,
believe. Is that right?
participated participated in three Olympics, but only two medals. So
Yep. Current high performance director for USA bobsled, PhD in engineering,
biological engineering, yes.
bioengineering, and current faculty member
Yeah,
at Nebraska.
three or four different jobs, I feel like some days, but yeah,
So,
I'm assistant professor of practice at the University of Nebraska in the biological systems engineering department, mostly biomechanics, that kind of stuff in yeah, prepping engineers for some kind of biomedical degree. But then, yeah, my other full-time job is director of sport performance for USA Bobsled and Skeleton. And yeah, that's wear two different hats most days.
now that's an impressive resume.
Yeah, and that was
Yeah.
an dodge by your part, Dr. Reimer, to not give your background, but we'll let that slide.
It could come back in. I mean, I have been known to slide into second once in a while.
Well, let's go ahead and kick this thing off. And I want to start it off and say, Curt, what is the thing that motivates you to do all of those things? Like, where does that come from? And because it's for some people, it seems like maybe that's too much, but for you, I'm sure you get energized by it.
Yeah, well, yeah, and first again, it's an honor to be part of this, and it's nice to meet you guys, and again, we'll see where this conversation goes. But having these roundtable discussions is always pretty fun. Um, I grew up in a small town in Nebraska. Had a number of jobs since I was about 12, 13, 14 years old, and I've never been satisfied just sitting around. I didn't have a video game system growing up. My mom encouraged me to be active all the time. And so I don't know if that led to always looking to kind of be part of something more and, wanting the next phase and that kind of thing. But when I retired from bobsledding in 2014, I kind of found myself sitting on my thumbs a little bit, and I needed something to do. And so my immediate reaction was to try to get back to school and start working on my PhD. And then with that, kind of opened up a few more doors to teaching. And then after a couple more years, the opening for the high performance director came open, and I kind of wanted to do it all. And so I worked closely with both institutions, I guess, to make sure I could have a balance there. And yeah, I'm never bored. I tell people it's always something exciting, either with students or with athletes.
Curt, if you were in your position, if you were to design your avatar for the perfect bobsled candidate, what would it be? And do you try to identify some of those traits in athletes in other particular sports that might be very, you think, successful in your sport?
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I don't want to turn this into a recruiting effort here, but yeah, we're always looking for more athletes, always recruiting, and acknowledging that very few, if any, people grow up bobsledding. Right? There's only 2 tracks in the United States, and it's not a high school sport, it's not NCAA sport, so every one of our athletes comes from other athletic background. And so, diverse athletes. I mean, we have a swimmer actually on our top World Cup team right now. We've got football players, track athletes, soccer, again, you name it. Again, we're looking for other athletes. The men are usually, again, it is kind of a small body type because you have to be strong, fast, but you also have to fit in the sled. So, usually 5'10" to 6'2", around 200 to 230 pounds. But bottom line, fast and explosive. That's what we're looking for. And again, I'm guessing you guys have trained or are training, worked with a lot of athletes about that type. So again, I'm not here to recruit, but if you know athletes, please send them our way.
Will do.
I might be past my prime, so I thought about it for a second. I actually had a conversation probably 25 years ago with someone that asked me if I was interested in bobsled, and I was still pursuing playing football at that time. But I think it's important to put it out there that just because you're an athlete with one sport doesn't mean you won't be a good fit to try something else. What are some traits that you've seen that other sports maybe make a good candidate for someone on the bobsled team?
Yeah. As part of our recruiting pitch, it's usually, you've been training to be a bobsledder or skeleton athlete all your life. You just didn't know it, right? You haven't been exposed to the sport, and it's more tangible and realistic than a lot of people think. They've seen Cool Runnings on TV, or they think it's only a sport 10 minutes every 4 years at the Olympics, and that's about it. But yeah, I mean, we have athletes from all across the country, all different sports. But to answer your question, what is common is definitely a blue collar ethic. Again, we're not that popular. Again, you can make the Olympics, and sure, you can get some recognition there, but our World Cup season, every year, is full of competitions away from home, against the world's best. So, you pretty much have to train full time without getting the glory, and definitely not getting the paycheck, of a professional athlete. And so that, that drive of, I just want to compete and I want to bring out the best in myself. That's what truly stands out, because very rarely do any of our athletes get a lot of recognition for doing well. But again, to ask you guys a question, then, I know that you've probably had different athletes, just kind of make that, I'll call it, just missed their dream, right? Just missed, an NFL combine, or, just missed making a professional career in some sport or another. And, it's usually those are the athletes we, kind of gravitate toward as well. It's like, we want to provide you an opportunity, knowing that, you may not have made your first dream, but, we're here to, again, maybe get you an Olympic opportunity within a year or two of trying out for the sport. So, I'm sure you guys have seen those athletes too.
I mean, honestly, like, like this week, it's draft week for Little League. So I'm doing some talent identification for my Little League baseball team as well. And probably not as sophisticated as what you're doing, but for last year's tryout, I did some 1 to 3 ratings on ability across fielding, throwing, sprinting, swing mechanics, and power. And then at the end of the season, once I knew which teams those players went on, and I knew how those teams did across the season, I had actually a pretty strong correlation between those factors. And so I've added some new data, like the Little League website makes mentions of all the players and what they do in games. So I use ChatGPT to get total number of mentions for each kid, their age, 6, 7, or 8, whether they're an all-star the year before. And I've got my R squared in my multiple regression model to 0.90 for the players you have in your team and end of season winning percentage. So I'm planning on using that to pick my team. And I'm bringing this up because you are recruiting athletes from different sports who have certain types of physical attributes, and then you probably bring them together into some type of assessment event. And like, what is the level of like assessment and analytics that goes into your efforts once you identify athletes who want to try out to be candidates for the team, and then going beyond like those initial assessments and those physical attributes? Like, how do you assess if someone has that blue collar, what it takes to be on the team, the ability to push or steer? Like, how do you start getting into those layers?
Yeah, our recruiting is very cast a wide net and then narrow it down kind of a thing. So our initial recruiting combines and screenings are just basically a 4-item test, kind of like any NFL combine or anything like that, right? 40-yard dash, 10-yard dash, a vertical jump, and a broad jump. And that, along with your height, weight, kind of body type, we try to again put an initial list together of who has potential. And then we do a little bit more sports specific type of pushing. Problem with our sport, well, not problem. One of the limitations with our sport is, of course, ice and cold weather type of sport. So, if we're recruiting in April and May, we're not going to get an athlete on the ice or in a sled to actually do the sport that we're recruiting for until October or November. And so, an athlete may be the best we've ever seen, in testing, but we get them in a sled and we ask them to push, and they're they don't like the violence of the sport, or it's pretty brutal sometimes. And so we just spent 6-8 months recruiting and getting this athlete ready, and they just realized they don't even like the sport. So that's one difficulty we face. But yeah, we try to do the same thing, pick apart the physical attributes. And then if there's a way to, try to recruit and identify the intangibles, I mean, I think every sport kind of faces that too, or how do you recruit, the best quarterback, right? I don't know if they still take the Wonderlic test and, those sorts of things to try to identify, again, the processing speed and, things like that of an athlete. But, we're in that same boat trying to get, find out what makes the best athletes psychologically click. What is that? What does that look like? It's tough for every sport, I think.
Curt, I want to ask a question about the cognition, and you mentioned psychological aspects. Before I get to that question, I had a former graduate assistant. She was a former bobsledder, and the traits of a bobsledder I got to see up close and personal. We had these games called the Show Me State games, and with that there is deadlift, bench press. Was there a squat component? No, just deadlift and bench press. And she broke the state deadlift record, and it was easy, like and with minimal training. So the level, when you talk about an athlete physically, like a bobsled athlete, they are strong, very, very strong, very explosive. And I've seen that. To go along with what you brought up earlier, what about the mind and the mindset and cognition? What do you think, um, based on your background on your multiple roles that you how important is that aspect to sport? And maybe have you looked at how do you develop it or evaluate it?
To answer that latter part first, it's I don't know if we found a good way to develop it, or it's in many ways an athlete has it or they don't. It's not something that's easily, installed into an athlete. Again, we can hone it and kind of bring it out in an athlete, maybe, but if they don't have it originally, it's pretty tough. But to go back to your first part of your question, yeah, again, we can have the best athletes in the world, but if they're standing at the top of the track and looking over the cliff and they're cold and they're scared because we're going to go 90 miles an hour and there's a chance we could crash, and those are the thoughts in their head, they're not going to be the best athlete, best push athlete that we're hoping for. And so it's almost, how do you turn those fears and how do you turn that negative thought into even something positive, something motivating? Can you take that fear and make it an adrenaline rush? Like a scout team running back. When I was back in college and I was scout team running back for Nebraska, and there were days where I'd look across the line of scrimmage and I got the Nebraska black shirt defense staring at me. And this is during practice, so I'm not getting recognition. I'm not on athletic scholarship. I was a walk-on. I know that I'm going to get my butt kicked 9 times out of 10, but I got to get all the energy that I can to accomplish this. And, taking that is kind of what I did to bobsled, taking that approach where, I'm not in the spotlight where the entire world's going to see me, at least prior to the Olympics. And, it's turning that into some kind of adrenaline rush, and feeding off that and, having that internal motivation. That's not something that's easy to put into an athlete, but, if an athlete doesn't have it to begin with, they're not going to be a good bobsled or skeleton athlete.
Curt, what does for our listeners, what does a normal day training and practice look like for bobsled?
Yeah, like every sport, we have it's seasonal. So again, we are on the ice in the track from middle of October through end of March at best. 2 tracks in the United States are in Lake Placid, New York, and Park City, Utah. So most of our in-season training is done there. And then, of course, once the races start and competitions start, we're traveling all over the world, going track to track, kind of like a NASCAR schedule. Races on the weekends, you go to the next track and compete, kind of thing. But in the off season, it's trying to get stronger, faster. Bottom line, right? So a lot of squats, cleans, sprints. That's usually the recipe to get better. But we want some kind of pushing component as well. As you guys know, it's training a baseball pitcher to throw faster. They got to pitch, right? You can make them stronger in the weight room and increase range of motion in their shoulder and everything, but they've got to pitch. So we want to do something to push as well. So most of our athletes, at least at the very elite level, they are full-time athletes. They might have a part-time job that, early morning it's lift or usually sprinting workouts in the morning, lifting workouts in the afternoon, doing recovery, at any other time when they can fit that in too. And so it's a full-time commitment without the full-time paycheck usually. But actually, that is kind of a question I kind of had too that I'd written down, I like asking this of any kind of strength coach too, is, what is the balance that you guys have with, the specificity principle, right? You guys want to make athletes stronger, faster in the weight room, sprinting, but yeah, how much attention do you give or allow them to do their sport specifically?
I might jump in on that one. So from a specificity standpoint, when training athletes, I've always kind of believed in training athletes to elicit the adaptations that would be beneficial and characteristic to the sport. And so sometimes the way you might train an athlete to elicit those adaptations doesn't always look like the sport. And then, the specificity comes from actually playing the sport. And most of the sports I've been involved in, though, it's they're team sports and some of those things. So sometimes it's hard to create a training modality that is truly sport specific and transfers to that sport skill. So, but that's been my approach. It has been to just identify what the physical attributes are that are beneficial to the sport, and then understand how to train athletes to elicit adaptations to improve those attributes. So that's always been my approach to training. And then from a training standpoint, like I've always been a firm believer, and I don't know how well this applies to bobsled or not, but the sport is the king. Like everything we're doing is meant for them to be as productive as possible when they're actually training for the sport. So that would be practice or competition. And so you always want your training to revolve around maximizing their readiness and their ability to be productive, to improve their skill and their tactics in the actual sport. So just constantly trying to say, like, how does this training plan and everything around this athlete allow them to be as productive as possible in training or practice today for that 2-hour period, as productive as they can be? Because I feel like a lot of times that's where when it, especially high skill level sports, like that's where a lot of the wins happen is in the actual sport. But I'm not sure with bobsled, it may not be, that might be an antithesis to what I've just expressed, because, what you described, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of bobsled, there are some pretty just physical attributes that you have to have in order to be successful in the sport before anything else.
Yeah. Like I said, there, if you don't have, at least that original or initial physical talent, psychological ability, again, you're not going to be in the mix. But, again, that limiting factor is our off season, where, again, we can't go down the track. And, we've had a lot of companies and different groups come to us and, want to try to build a simulator or, give us some kind of method or a way to practice, especially the driving component. But, playing video games, doesn't make you a better bobsledder. You have to feel it, you have to be in the middle of it. And, you just can't do that in the off season, or if you're away from, again, our 2 tracks in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So for the audience, take us through a bobsled race. So you're on the track, everyone's set up and ready to go. Like, just walk us through how the actual event unfolds, like a rundown the track and everything. So just curious to know how that kind of plays out and
Yeah, that, again, the way our races happen and the format, I guess, kind of says a lot about, how we have to train as well. So our typical races, 2-man race, so a 4-man race for the men. The women have monobob and 2 women. So slightly different disciplines, but same number of medal opportunities. But every race almost every race is 2 heats. So we go down the track twice, and they add the total time of both runs. So there is no preliminary round and final round kind of a thing. It's both runs have to count. At the Olympics and World Championships, we actually get 4 runs, and it takes place over 2 days. So yeah, same thing. They have the total of all 4 runs there. But in a single day, the first heat is usually by a random draw to a degree. There's kind of tiers, but again, the random draw determines what order you go down. And what can be frustrating is it's an outdoor winter sport, and weather changes over the course of, the amount of time that, run to run or sled to sled, they go down the hill. So it's something we have to live with. The athletes in both sports, bobsled and skeleton, everybody pushes for about 4 or 5 seconds. They jump on their sled and go down the hill. Most tracks are about a mile long, and it takes about a minute to get down to the bottom. So somewhere in there, you're probably going over 80, some tracks even 90 miles an hour. You get done, and there's usually about an hour, maybe up to a 2-hour break before you do it again. So when when people ask me about doing cardio and having any endurance, my answer is no. Even I would get fatigued running 100 meters. It's that much of just an explosive movement. So yeah, sprint 40 meters and then rest for an hour and do it again after that. So type 2B muscle fibers, that's primarily what we're thinking about.
And
okay.
Sorry, Ted, I didn't mean to step on you. Is there like a reaction time component at the start?
Good question. Yeah. Not yes and no. So most of the time, no is the answer. So typically, we have a 60-second shot clock, we call it, or a start clock, and you get a green light, and you have 1 minute to break the 15-meter high, and that's actually when the clock starts. So get 60 seconds. Team gets together. You kind of get all set, ready to go, and then like I said, that the clock starts when you hit 15 meters. However, there is a new event coming up this next year, or this next Olympics, and that one is actually a reactionary start. It's only in skeleton, so it's only in the individual events. But it's again like drag racing, formula, or high fuel drag racing, right? You got the light countdown, and then athlete takes off, and it's proving to be an advantage, at least for the American team right now. I don't want to give away our secrets, but that extra 15 meters now means that your start is even more important. And so our skeleton team, especially, we have some really good starters that are fast at the top of the track. Maybe their skill hasn't developed yet to drive down the rest of the track to keep up with some of the best in the world. But those extra 15 meters, that's going to be an advantage we have going into next Olympics here.
So there's someone, I mean, you revealed to us that you played college football as well.
Yeah.
So even more impressive. And someone on this call happens to be a high octane motorcycle drag racer. And I've witnessed it, and the reaction time is pretty good. So, Dr. Ivey, do you want to talk about maybe some of your experience with reaction time? Because he might be a candidate. I've seen his reaction times. They're pretty impressive.
No, I'm gonna dodge this one like you dodged the intro. And I will tell you, reaction time, it's about focus. So you can have the training, but you have to block out distractions. There's the impulsivity of, you have to anticipate as well. So it's not just waiting till something happens, it's anticipating when it's going to happen on that start, and then getting everything to fire. Like obviously if you're drag racing, you have to get from your sound, what you hear, what you see, what you feel has to translate into a countdown. And then there's a series of reactions from what you think you should do, and then how much you've practiced reacting fast. And then to get it to go through your body mechanically, biomechanically, and then with the bobsled, you have to react to the ice. I'm sure maybe some sort of external conditions. You got to block out distractions. You have to make things happen. So your practice, your deliberate practice, has to come into effect. I'm thinking, Curt, from a research standpoint, how important. So I have two questions. How important is video with your and videoing mechanics of the sprint, you said, I believe you said 4 to 6 seconds, somewhere in there. That to me, that's like a 40-yard dash. That's the equivalent of if you can have a faster 40-yard dash, maybe that's the equivalent of pushing the bobsled. The second part of the question, obviously, once you're into the bobsled, the drivers, my novice knowledge level thinks that the driver does all the work, but I'm guessing the person that was doing the pushing still has to do something because maybe you can throw the weight and balance off. So can you talk about from that reaction time, the importance of mechanics, video analysis with that, and then what do you do, the driver's driving, what are the other bobsledders doing during that mile ride?
Yeah, I'm getting fired up here. This is great here because you guys talking about reaction time, and maybe I'm just naive a little bit with with drag racing and how their systems work. But in skeleton, the reaction start system now, they implement it so there's a countdown. It's like a red light, 5, 4, 3, 2, and then after that there's a range of when the green light will come up. And so you can't really get the rhythm of the 5, 4, 3, 2. You get to 1, and there could be a pause, a short pause, could be a long pause before that green light.
Wow.
So that it truly is reactive. You can't anticipate, because if you anticipate now, you're going to jump the gun. And so again, it's a new event, and so we've been trying to figure out and do some research and talk to different people. How do you train reaction? Again, you could talk about track athletes reacting to the gun. There's some similarities there too, but we've started to come up with the approach that as you mentioned, it's kind of a clear your mind, don't anticipate, just focus and kind of let it come to you, right? It's better to be relaxed rather than too high strung and jump the gun, because then you're disqualified or you got a penalty. So so we're trying to explore that. It's a new beast to us in aspect of the sport here. But your second question, I guess, talking about video and talking about mechanics. We watch video. We push 4 or 5 seconds at the most, but we probably spend sometimes an hour or two dissecting every shin angle, hand placement, especially in a 4-man team. How do we load into the sled? It's interesting, the sled is obviously moving the same speed for everybody, but we're trying to kind of dissect who's contributing the most force, and who's contributing the most at the start, the first 4 or 5 steps, who's contributing more when it gets up to speed, and how do you put together a team that really makes that sled accelerate as a team, right? You can have one really, really fast guy, but if he doesn't have strength to get it out of the hole, his role is going to be later on. So again, I'm getting away from that, but bottom line, we spend all kinds of time looking at video from different angles and really trying to be perfect in our technique. Also knowing that not every body type is the same, right? Everybody's perfection of their best push is going to be a little bit different, just based off anatomical positioning and that sort of thing. But once we get into the sled, to answer your last question, I'd say 99% of the push athlete's job is over. It's up to the pilot now to get down the rest of the track. A push athlete in the back of the sled could do something to screw up the run, but there's really not much that they can do to help or aid. I know a lot of people, and it's a very fair question, probably because of cool runnings. They think we lean back and forth. We don't practice in a bathtub or anything like that. But again, it's if you contribute something to the back of the sled that the pilot isn't expecting, it's like the passenger of a motorcycle, right? You're going to throw off the driver. They want to just, the athletes in the back of the sled just go with the curve, just kind of become part of the sled and don't fight it. You need to anticipate it so you don't get thrown off, when you go into a fast curve. But just become part of the sled and ride fast. That's kind of what we try to do there. Well, actually, we always joke there are 2 things you can do in the back of the sled. You can swear or you can pray, and that's really about it. So.
Curt, with your background in engineering, how much input do you give relative to the equipment and the sled design that is being utilized?
This could be another 3-hour podcast, I guess, if we get into this part here. But that's one of the parts of the sport that I really fell in love with too. I mean, one, yeah, you have the physical, just how explosive are you? Two, you've got the excitement of going, get 90 miles an hour with your hair on fire. But three, there's definitely a technology and equipment aspect of the sled that if you don't have an aerodynamic sled or a sled, that steers well, and that's where you're not going to be competitive. So you have to, again, be strong in 3 phases: the push, the driving, and the sled and the equipment. When I came into the sport, it was perfect timing because the Bodine sled project. So Jeff Bodine was a NASCAR driver in the 80s and 90s. I think it was the 1992 Olympics, he realized that the Americans were buying their sleds from other countries. We just didn't have an American-made sled. So he took his NASCAR technology and started building bobsleds. And it took one of his chief engineers, who can't make this up. His name is Bob. And maybe that's why he was given this responsibility. I'm not sure, but he put him in charge of now making bobsleds. And over the course of my career and prior to that, a little bit, Bob came up with a pretty incredible fast sled. And what's, kind of my favorite part of the story, well, sounds cruel here, but Bob was, he was in his 60s, a little bit older. He's actually never been down the track in a bobsled. So he relied on the athletes to give him the feedback and to, play that role. And so me kind of having an engineering background and understanding, scientific method and, engineering design process and stuff, he really listened to my feedback on what was happening in the back of the sled. Was it tracking correctly? Was it violent? Did I hear any rattling? All that sort of stuff. So yeah, I like to feel my engineering degree actually played a role in, helping us build a fast sled.
So I'll go ahead and ask a question. What do you see from a peak standpoint in terms of age with athletes? Like as a driver, can you go later in your career versus a push athlete, and kind of what is that age range, and where do you see maybe some drop off?
So I'd say for the men, it's pretty typical. Usually late 20s is kind of their athletic peak. We have a few athletes that compete until their mid late 30s. And just same with NFL or other sports as well. But yeah, I did say with the women, it's a little bit different. We found again it's the women maybe even peak a little bit later, which is maybe surprising to some people, but at the same time, the longevity of a career is really aids, and because we don't get athletes that start to post collegiate career, a lot of them don't start and even see a sled for the first time until they're 23, 24 years old. So again, everything's just kind of delayed maybe a little bit or shifted to be a little bit older. Arguably, we have 2 of the best female pilots in the world, and they're both in their late 30s right now. But still, they're going to be some of our best Olympic medal hopefuls coming up next year at the 26 Olympics. Most of our pilots are, I don't want to say failed push athletes, but most of them start out as push athletes and, either want to be in charge, they want that adrenaline rush, they want to be in front of the sled, and kind of take it from there. So most of these successful pilots are also really good at pushing too. It's not like we can just take a non-athletic race car driver and put him in the front of the sled and be competitive. They have to be able to push too.
Now, those NASCAR drivers, I watched the show. They work out now.
Yeah.
I mean, they're pretty good athletes. I know the pit crew, those guys are trained. Most of those guys are professional athletes, former professional athletes, and they train pretty hard. I think it's if you're into coaching bobsledding, how do you get started? if you want to coach? Or is it that you were the push athlete, then you became the driver, and then you become the coach?
That's pretty common rule. I mean, I could name every bobsled coach on one hand here in the United States, right? There's not much of a youth program. There's not a lot of club sliding or even senior league, right? If you're bobsledding, you're probably in our national team pool, and that's it. So it's a small community. Yeah, every one of our coaches is a former athlete, former bobsled or skeleton athlete. So sometimes our start coach, again, that really just focuses on the sprinting and the mechanics there. Sometimes they can come from a track background and not have a background in bobsled, but for the most part, again, they have that experience here and kind of know what to expect. But, pretty common. Hey, I mean, you guys are around other sports too, I guess. It's not uncommon probably in other sports more often than bobsled, where you get coaches that never played the sport, but they have an analytical mind, or they can pick it up and still be able to teach it, coach it, but it's pretty rare with us.
Well, you know what they say, right? Like, those who can't do it, coach. Those who can't coach, strength coach. Those who can't strength coach become sports scientists. But I think it's interesting that because you mentioned there's not like a youth sliding programs in the country and stuff. Like I worked at the U.S. Olympic ski team earlier in my career, and long-term athlete development and developing the pipeline was really, really important. Trying to create the right environment for up and coming ski racers to continue to develop the skill over years and years and years of skiing to try to eventually win an Olympic gold medal. But I just find it so fascinating that, like, to me, it seems like if what you were describing is accurate, or if I'm understanding it correctly, that bobsled is huge on like talent identification and like poaching athletes from their other sports where they've trained and played at a high level, and trying to bring them over into bobsled, and then teaching them how to drive a sled, essentially.
Yeah, and I don't mean there's zero youth, because we do participate and send an athlete or two to the Youth Olympics. But for the most part, I'll say it's the athletes that sign up. There's not much of a recruiting or even a tryout process. It's you sign up and you can afford to go. That's been kind of the history of youth bobsledding in the past. But and there are a few athletes that do grow up in Park City, Utah, or near Lake Placid, New York. And, they do get started at a young age. But it always comes down to the debate. Are you able to make them an athlete when they get into their 20s, 30s, or do you take an athlete and turn them into a good bobsled pilot or skeleton athlete that way? And I'll say that the data has driven us to show that, taking an athlete post-collegiate, even though they've never touched the sled until their early 20s, teaching them how to drive a bobsled, knowing that they're going to have a really fast start, that has been the pipeline to lead to more Olympic medals than the opposite, the other way.
What are the most common injuries in bobsled and skeleton?
Most common injuries, well, again, there's the danger aspect. Of course, we could crash, and then of course, we're dealing with bumps, bruises, concussions, those sorts of things, the acute injuries that way. But again, because it's hard, we do our sport twice a day for, a minute at a time. So I'll say a lot of the injuries are just from training. And, just like you guys probably experience and expect, if you can minimize the training injuries, that's huge, right? Because it doesn't make sense to get injured unless you're actually doing your sport. But because we're, again, outdoor, cold weather, trying to warm up wearing heavy coats and snow pants and trying to run in icy parking lots, I can imagine there's a lot of pulled muscles. That's pretty common. Again, more so than other sports, just because of those factors I mentioned. But pushing a skeleton sled, well, even pushing a bobsled is also interesting. Skeleton especially. And again, I don't know if you're familiar with the sport, but it's running in the most unnatural position possible. You know, you got your hand on your shoelaces, right, as you're trying to sprint, and nobody is built to sprint fast that way. So yeah, they have you have to have an incredibly strong, core and hip flexors, trying to run in that position. But even pushing a bobsled, it's, significant amount of weight, and everything is anterior out in front of you. So, we have a tendency to just be tipped forward with everything. So when we're doing squats, we're doing cleans, we're coming up on our toes, we have a hard time, just sitting back in the most efficient positions, as you guys know. So, a lot of times that leads to injuries in the weight room too. That's more tension on patellar tendons and, quad muscles and stuff, so that leads to injury just because of the tendencies of the sport.
Curt, I have a question about talent selection. Where the NBA and NFL, they have a combine. Do you go about selecting athletes? Is there a combine? Is there a regional combine or a national combine? Like, how do people find out about the opportunity to maybe display some talents or some skills? And what are those measurements if there is a setup, I guess, like a combine?
So first, I guess I'll say this was kind of a side effect of COVID. When we couldn't go out and recruit with in-person combines, we set up a virtual combine, which is basically submit us your athletic resume, send us a video along with your times of a 40, a 10-yard dash, a vertical jump, that kind of stuff. You can imagine we get a lot of 4.3 40s, and here's my time, kind of thing. But at least it's initial screening. We get athletes in the door, and we can kind of test them out that way. But we take it with a grain of salt too, knowing that we're going to have to get a little more verification to truly see it. But then, I'm actually the last few days here, I'm in the process of setting up our upcoming off-season recruiting combine series. And so across the nation, right now we're looking at about 10, maybe a dozen different cities of in-person combines throughout April and May. And again, if we can spread them out for the most part, it's our attempt at trying to, again, cast that really wide net, do just that initial 40, 10 vertical jump, broad jump, and then take the best athletes up to Lake Placid and kind of teach them to push. And, if they can learn to push, that's great, but we still got to get them down the track in October. And so that's, kind of the recruiting series and pipeline. That's kind of how I got involved. And 99% of our athletes, again, it's coming from another sport and just trying out, or word of mouth, or, hearing about it different ways.
So Curt, when you were a football player at Nebraska, what were your stats? Height, weight, your speed, power profile? So
I was really good at the athletic testing, that we do. Boyd Epley was my strength coach, growing up. And so if you're in the strength and conditioning world, you've, probably heard that name for a long time. But, they were big on, the periodic testing and that sort of thing. And actually, I came to Nebraska on an academic scholarship, and I tried out for the football team. And so to try out, I had to go through their process and stand out one way or another. We had 120 kids try out at the same time that I did, and they kept only 3 of us at that time, which, again, they were looking for a scout team running back. So they just wanted somebody that wouldn't get hurt for a while, I guess, maybe. But no, my vertical jump was just over 39 inches, and my electronic 4.5140, I think, is what I ran in college. And so, 6'1", 220, 230 pounds. And again, I didn't know it at the time, but that is the right body type for a bobsled athlete. And so I was a running back for 2 years, and then I was a linebacker for 2 years. And most of my time was special teams, kickoffs, punt teams, and that sort of thing. But in an actual game, I had 1 carry for 2 yards. Thanks. That was it. But then end of my career, probably had 10, maybe a dozen tackles. But I realized I'm not going to the NFL, so I found another sport. And again, that's kind of a common story for our bobsled athletes now.
Well, all I can say is that, like, I'm the fastest person in this virtual room right now, like since we're just self-reporting here. Putting that out there.
I don't know if that is there a correlation because you're the youngest yet too. I'm not sure.
Well, sure. I'll be the youngest too. I mean, it's a virtual room, so I'm self-reporting my capabilities. Definitely the fastest in the room.
So Ernie, what's your home the first time?
Too fast to reveal.
Is this before you pulled your hamstring or after? I'm trying to remember. Because that happened recently, I thought.
Definitely before.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Definitely before.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
It's important to ask questions. This is the research to reps roundtable, and you can't just let someone say something without questioning, what they're saying. So we're definitely questioning you being the fastest.
Well, I mean, it's like Curt said, it's the virtual combine. So, you can send in your 4.340 speed and don't, and then you have to show up to actually reveal the truth. But
it's interesting again when we do that the eye test, watching the video rather than just looking at the time that they submit, you can see who's running 5.5 seconds compared to 4.5 seconds without a clock, but we've definitely called athletes out where they submit a certain time and it's not bad, so we invite them to the next round and all of a sudden they're about half a second slower than what they initially said.
Curt,
Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Pat.
No, Ted, you got it.
Have you looked at ideal standing seated height ratios? Is that a factor? When you were talking about being in the most awkward position to sprint fast with touching your shoelaces. Have you found that maybe somebody with a shorter legs, a longer torso might be more advantageous versus somebody with long legs and a shorter torso?
Yeah, for skeleton, I'll say, and it's maybe just because there's a few more participants, but on the men's side, there are a lot of say like kind of hurdler body types or high jumper type of body types, and I'm not sure if that's a torso to leg ratio or whatever you mentioned there, I guess, but it is pretty tall, slender type. There are a few that are the opposite though. There's some outliers that are a little shorter in stature, and their legs are kind of Roadrunner or Flintstone type legs. They can just get a huge fast turnover, and so it may be one or the other. I'm not sure yet. We just need more athletes to do some testing and research on, but it's a very fair question.
Ernie, what did you find work with skiers? Did that have any influence, or it's just that's not an important variable?
Like as far as like the aerodynamics goes, or
yes.
Yeah, like probably a lot more important with the like downhill and super G, because those are the speed events where you have to hold an aerodynamic position for a prolonged period of time. But in the more technical events where it's more, agile, the aerodynamics may not have been something we looked at as much, but there was definitely wind tunnel testing and everything, looking at suit design, like fabrics and things that might have better flow. And Curt's an engineer, I'm not, so I'm probably butchering this, but we definitely did a lot of wind tunnel stuff, trying to find the helping the athletes discover the best positions they could be in that would allow the most aerodynamics and things. And so, but yeah, that was always a big issue, and at least downhill, because if you lost your tuck, you just basically become a human parachute and you lose a bunch of time.
Yeah, and that's without turning this into a physics lesson here, there's a lot to be said for the density of an athlete, because I'll say there's a weight limit. There's two weight limits. There's a minimum weight limit for an empty sled. Our sled has to weigh at least 210 kilograms for a 4-man sled. And then with the athletes in the sled, the max weight is 630 kilograms. So we want to push an empty sled as light as possible, right? But when the athletes are in the sled, we want to be as heavy as possible going down the hill. So we want we want the athletes to be, as big as possible. They can average 105 kilos, so like 230 pounds or so, 232. But if they're too big, then they're just a sail in the sled, right? They're just not very aerodynamic. So we want small but heavy athletes, and some density is it's kind of a factor. And again, we haven't found a way to recruit dense athletes or anything, but yeah, we're playing that game too. It's what is the best, the physical shape and dimensions of an athlete.
Now, Curt, you're going to have probably an interesting response to this, different than a lot of other guests. We always finish this up by asking our guests some reading recommendations for our listeners. And I think your background is very unique, so you might have some interesting, book recommendations for our listeners.
Well, I'll say one that comes to mind right away, and it's now probably 10, 12 years old or more here, but The Sports Gene by David Epstein. I think that was a big one, and really talking about body types, and again, not disputing the 10,000 hour rule, but just flat out saying if you don't have the right body type, you can practice all you want, you're just never going to be a certain athlete, right? I'm never going to be in the NBA, right? No matter how long I practice, that kind of thing. That's very interesting to me, book to me. One I just read recently, it's not really athletic related, but it does kind of talk about the evolution of humans and kind of how we got to where we are. But I think it's called Sapiens. A really recent book that I read. It's really interesting. Talking about again how we got to where we are, and maybe even tying it to the sports gene. Are humans made to run its skeleton athlete position? Or why are we the way we are, and kind of how we got to this point. So those are two that I enjoyed recently.
Well, Curt, we're going to wrap this one up. I want to say thank you. The time has flown by. We may have to do a part 2, or maybe it'll be 3 and 4. Just want to say thank you, and really appreciate the time you spent with us today.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure. Again, it's great to talk to you guys, get to dive into the sports science and strength and conditioning side of what we do. And, it's not just that surface level kind of thing, but it's always a good time.
Thanks a lot, Curt.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Take care, guys.
Oh, he